There are many drivers on the grid with championship winning potential. Drivers like Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, and George Russell are widely regarded as potential future champions. But to achieve that feat, these drivers will need to beat Max Verstappen, and right now that's looking incredibly difficult to achieve. So, what is Verstappen doing to elevate himself so far above the rest? Let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. The impressive skill Verstappen brings to the table. Verstappen was always tipped to become a world champion in Formula One. He started his career at a very young age and quickly established himself as a quick and talented driver with massive potential. Verstappen is in his ninth season of Formula One despite being just 26 years old. The key advantage that Verstappen has is his consistency. In 2023, Verstappen has been so dominant, winning 17 races so far, with the potential to win 19 before the end of the year. For some drivers, this dominance would lead to potential complacency. Especially once the World Championship is secured, it is seemingly easy to relax and not give 100% in every Grand Prix. But Verstappen will never let his rivals have it that easy. Every single race weekend, Verstappen is a confident winner, often beating his competitors by more than 10 or 20 seconds. This consistency over the whole season is incredibly difficult to deliver, especially when the season is 22 races long. When Nico Rosberg needed to deliver the championship-winning consistency in 2016, beating Lewis Hamilton, it took all of his focus and even resulted in his subsequent retirement from the sport as he couldn't maintain the levels of consistency required to repeat the achievement in the future seasons. But Verstappen has kept this up for several years now. Last season, when Red Bull were initially challenged by Ferrari early on in the year, Verstappen continued to deliver consistent performance and very quickly overturned the biggest points deficit of any F1 driver in history to win the World Championship, after being 46 points behind Leclerc at one point in the season. The only reason he was so far behind Leclerc in the first place was due to some bad luck for Verstappen, as he retired in both Bahrain and Australia, two of the opening three races of the year. This was nothing to do with Verstappen's performances, and once the team sorted their reliability concerns with the RB18, Verstappen very quickly overturned that deficit just 3 races later. Perhaps the best example of Verstappen's consistent ability to deliver excellent results came in his close-fought battle with Lewis Hamilton for the 2021 World Championship. In that season, both drivers were at the top of their game with just a handful of mistakes over the course of the year. Notable mistakes in that season from the drivers include Lewis Hamilton's mistake on the restart in Azerbaijan, where Hamilton went from second position to the back of the grid with his rival out of the race, and perhaps Verstappen's biggest mistake came at Monza, where he was deemed responsible for the two title protagonists coming together at the opening chicane, though this had no impact on the championship standings with both drivers out of the race. It has to be said that Verstappen had the worst of the luck in 2021 as well, with the tyre blowout in Azerbaijan and being a passenger in Valtteri Bottas's lack of car control into Turn 1 at Hungary cost Verstappen significantly, as well as his race at Silverstone coming to an abrupt end on the opening lap due to his title rival. But really, while Hamilton made some errors that cost him significantly relative to Verstappen, the Dutch driver did not. His lost points were more down to poor luck rather than mistakes over the course of the season. This avoidance of costly mistakes is something that puts Max Verstappen in a tier of driver that few others are able to match, and this is perhaps why it is reasonable to start talking about Verstappen in the greatest of all time conversations, despite being just 26 years old. Opportunity is key in this era of Formula One. Of course, success in Formula One is not just down to the driver. While they obviously play a significant role, the car and team that they are in is also a critical factor in the success of a driver. Naturally, the best drivers find their way into the best teams in the sport, and the drivers I mentioned in the beginning of this video are all in some of the best teams in the sport at the moment. But over the last decade, the sport has been dominated by just 2 teams, and the Drivers' World Champion has either been driving for Mercedes or Red Bull since 2010. With reliability playing a smaller role in the championship in more recent times, the teams with an inherent advantage seem to be able to maintain this over long periods of time. The Mercedes dominance in particular was an example of a team that had an advantage in terms of both aerodynamic performance and power unit performance since the new engines were introduced in 2014. Today, it seems like Red Bull is firmly in a similar kind of dominant era with their aerodynamic advantage becoming clear with the new regulations and the power units reaching parity for the big teams. So realistically, with these periods of dominance in seasons outside of 2021 over the last few years, it seems like only a few drivers have actually had the machinery and the talent to win a world championship. As such, it seems like Verstappen is just the driver with the best opportunity to win the title at the moment, which has meant he's been able to show this consistency without being under too much pressure when it comes to the World Championship. Nonetheless, this doesn't diminish the Dutch driver's achievements. Verstappen's ability to keep dominating his teammate each and every season shows that he is in a class of his own. But equally, drivers such as Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris and George Russell are yet to have a car that's capable of consistently winning races throughout the whole year. This means it's more difficult to see whether these drivers can deliver the consistency required to compete with Verstappen if they had cars of a similar ability. Of those three young drivers, Lando Norris has probably shown his ability to deliver consistency the most. Since his car has been good enough to compete in the top 5, he's been one of the most consistent drivers on the grid. At the same time, Norris hasn't been flawless. His qualifying mistake in Mexico, which wasn't helped by the fact that he could only have a single run due to a car issue, meant he ended up 17th on the grid that day. But outside of that, Norris has delivered the most second place finishes of any driver in 2023, and he's ended up second on the podium on 6 occasions this year. The fact that he's achieved this despite only having a competitive car for about half the season shows that he has the ability to score good results every weekend when given the chance. Norris has been performing at this level throughout the year, but given he was in a car that was struggling to even compete in the midfield at the beginning of the season, it's becoming clearer through the year that he's a driver that is developing the talents needed to compete for a world championship if given the right machinery. Norris is up against a rookie teammate in Oscar Piastri, which always means that he's expected to comprehensively beat his teammate. But Piastri has been excellent at times this year, and despite this, Norris is continuing to show why he's given preference on the car upgrades at McLaren. If McLaren manage to continue their current trajectory, it seems like they may have a car that could compete with Red Bull on a more regular basis next year. If they manage that in 2024, then a Verstappen versus Norris championship fight could be one of the best. Charles Leclerc is a driver that's known for the occasional mistake. The Ferrari driver is one of the best on the grid when it comes to qualifying, as I covered in another video. But at the same time, when Leclerc pushes the boundaries, he's prone to making an error and putting his car in the barrier. For example, he pushed it to the limit in Miami earlier this year. In a similar fashion, when Ferrari started the 2022 season with a car capable of winning races regularly, the Monegasque driver did make mistakes. For example, in France, the driver was leading the race and showing that his car was still able to beat Red Bull despite their rivals closing the gap. But his mistake to put it in the barrier was a distinctive moment in the season, and it was an unforced error. These unforced errors could have been what made the difference had their championship fight continued through the rest of the season. So while Leclerc is incredibly fast, I don't think he's yet shown the levels of consistency to compare himself with Max Verstappen. George Russell is going through a season where he isn't being particularly consistent at all. Last year, he impressed in his first season in the Mercedes as he beat Lewis Hamilton in equal machinery. But in 2023, he struggled. Russell's season has been marred with mistakes, and so far he's only achieved a single podium finish in his W14, while his teammate has had 6, which could easily have been 7 had he avoided the disqualification following the US Grand Prix earlier in the year. Some significant mistakes for Russell include his trip into the runoff area at Monaco, which cost him a good opportunity to step on the podium on that day, as he instead ended up 5th. His crash in Canada left him out of the race, and his poor mistake on the final lap in Singapore when he was chasing Norris and Sainz for the win was also a significant mistake. These 3 examples are not an exhaustive list of when it comes to Russell's mistakes this year. The gap to Lewis Hamilton this season is significant, and this isn't something that is completely Russell's fault, with car issues and strategic mistakes also impacting his season. However, Russell's clear lack of consistency through the 2023 year has cost him dearly. While his teammate is chasing Sergio Perez down to secure 2nd in the World Championship, Russell is languishing down in 8th, behind the 2 Ferraris, Lando Norris and Fernando Alonso. This is not what you'd expect from a potential world champion, and while he was incredibly consistent in 2022 with consistent top 5 finishes, he's been disappointing in 2023. So while there have been times where we've seen Russell show he could fight for a world championship with consistency through a year, he hasn't shown this over a prolonged period of time. Even if Russell had equal machinery to Verstappen, it seems clear that the Dutchman would outperform him over the course of a full season. Of course, right now it's going to be challenging for any driver outside of Red Bull to show that they're capable of delivering the consistency required to compete with Max Verstappen over the course of a 24-race season. The fact that the 3-time world champion can deliver results in such a consistent way is what puts him above the other drivers of his generation so far. It's certainly the case that Leclerc, Norris, and Russell have the potential to become world champion in the future, but right now they haven't had the opportunity, and it feels like Verstappen has raised the bar when it comes to the sustained performance required, and as long as Red Bull provides him with a car that can compete, he will deliver results week in, week out.